You are not being invited to negotiate, human. You are being reminded where you belong. The words echoed through the Galactic Senate Hall, followed by the laughter of hundreds of alien representatives. At the center of the chamber stood Daniel Whitmore, Earth's ambassador to the galaxy, holding a simple black folder in his hands. He did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed. He simply looked at the faces around him and quietly closed the folder. High Senator Vern Kale watched him from the elevated platform above. The Aurelian leader had spent decades mastering the art of political humiliation, and today he believed he had found his easiest target. A young civilization from a small blue planet. Humanity. Ambassador Whitmore, Varun said, his voice carrying across the enormous hall. Your request for independent trade authority has been reviewed and rejected. The giant holographic display behind him showed Earth's proposal. Fair trade agreements. Equal access to shipping lanes. Protection for human merchants operating across the outer colonies. Nothing aggressive. Nothing unreasonable. But the Senate had already made its decision. You misunderstand our position, Varun continued. The galaxy has existed for thousands of years without human guidance. Your species has been traveling between stars for less than a century. You should be grateful we allow you to participate at all. More laughter followed. Daniel looked down at the floor for a moment. Not because he was ashamed, because he was thinking. Sarah Collins, his diplomatic aide, watched from the human delegation area. She knew that expression. Daniel was not searching for an argument. He was deciding whether an argument was even worth having. Senator, Daniel finally said, his voice calm. May I ask one question? Vern smiled. Of course. I would hate for you to leave without feeling heard. The sarcasm was obvious. Daniel ignored it. If Earth stopped providing its current trade services tomorrow, would the Senate consider that a problem? The room became slightly quieter. Vern leaned forward. Your trade services? He almost laughed again. Humanity transports some goods, repairs some equipment, operates some minor shipping routes. Do not mistake participation for importance. Daniel nodded slowly. I see. Sarah looked at him carefully. That answer bothered her. Not because it was weak, because it was too calm. Vern noticed the lack of emotion and became more confident. You came here expecting respect because you have a few successful industries. But respect is earned through power, Ambassador, not through requests. Daniel looked around the Senate Hall. He saw ancient civilizations with massive fleets, endless resources, and centuries of influence. He also saw something else. They had forgotten a simple truth. The strongest systems were often the ones nobody noticed. Senator Kale, Daniel said, when a bridge holds thousands of vehicles every day, people rarely think about the engineers who built it. Varun frowned slightly. What does that have to do with this discussion? Daniel picked up his folder. Nothing. He turned toward the exit. Not anymore. The entire chamber watched him walk away. No angry speech. No final threat. No dramatic warning. Just a man leaving after being ignored. Sarah quickly followed him through the massive Senate doors. Outside the chamber, she lowered her voice. Daniel, are you really okay with that? He continued walking through the polished corridors of the diplomatic complex. No, Sarah looked surprised. Then why did you let him say all of that? Daniel stopped for a moment and looked back toward the Senate Hall. Because sometimes people need to finish laughing before they can hear the silence afterward. Sarah studied his expression. What happens now? Daniel looked at the message waiting on his communicator. One simple instruction from Earth Command. Begin withdrawal protocol. He closed the screen and placed the communicator away. Now, he said quietly, we stop asking them to notice us. And inside the Senate Hall, where alien leaders continued celebrating their victory, nobody realized they had just ignored the last warning they would ever receive. The first thing Daniel Whitmore noticed after leaving the Senate Hall was not the anger. It was the silence. Behind him, the alien delegates were still celebrating. Their voices echoed through the diplomatic corridors as they discussed how easily they had dismissed Earth's request. They believed the meeting was over. They believed humanity had lost. Sarah Collins walked beside Daniel, holding her tablet tightly against her chest. I have to ask, she said. Are we really walking away? Daniel continued toward the human embassy without slowing down. Yes. Sarah looked confused. That is it. No response. No statement. Nothing. Daniel glanced at her. Sarah, what would you like me to say? She hesitated. That they were wrong. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. They will figure that out on their own. Inside the Earth Embassy, The atmosphere was completely different from the Senate hall. There were no celebrations, no angry speeches, just people quietly preparing reports and closing files. Daniel entered the command room, where several human officials were waiting. Admiral Marcus Reed stood near the main display, reviewing a series of trade maps. How bad was it? Marcus asked. Daniel placed the black folder on the table. Exactly as expected. The admiral looked at him. They refused. They laughed. Nobody reacted with surprise. They had already prepared for that answer. Sarah looked around the room. Everyone knew this was possible. Marcus nodded. For years. She looked confused. Then why did we keep negotiating? Daniel sat down and removed his jacket. Because diplomacy is not about proving you're stronger. It is about giving people a chance to make the right choice. Sarah looked at the trade map on the screen. Thousands of routes connected different civilizations. Human shipping lanes crossed through hundreds of systems. And now, she asked. Marcus touched the display. Several routes changed color. Now we follow the withdrawal protocol. Sarah looked at Daniel. Explain it to me. Daniel studied the map for a moment. Earth has spent 20 years building trade relationships. We repaired damaged infrastructure. We created navigation systems. We trained engineers. We helped planets that had no other options. He pointed toward the glowing routes. But we never owned those worlds. We never controlled them. We simply became useful. Sarah slowly understood. And now we stopped being useful. Daniel nodded. We stopped volunteering for people who do not respect us. The first phase began quietly. Human companies suspended optional contracts. Earth transport vessels completed their final deliveries and returned home. Engineers finished their remaining assignments and handed over instructions. There were no threats, no accusations, no dramatic announcements. That was what made everyone uneasy. Across the galaxy, officials started noticing small changes. A repair station on a distant colony reported that human specialists had left. A shipping company discovered that several maintenance systems required human authorization. A mining operation found that their logistics software was built around Earth standards. At first, nobody panicked. They assumed it was temporary. Then High Senator Vern Kale received his first report. He was sitting in his private office, reviewing the successful Senate session, when his assistant entered. Senator, we have a minor issue. Vern looked up. What kind of issue? The assistant placed a report on the table. Several trade companies are experiencing delays. Vern barely glanced at it. Then fixed them. The assistant remained silent. Senator, the problem involves human systems. Vern frowned. Human systems? Yes. Their support networks are disconnecting. Vern leaned back. Earth is making a political statement. Give them time. They will return. The assistant looked uncertain. Senator, there is something else. What? The human ambassador did not leave a negotiation request. Vern looked annoyed. Then what did he leave? The assistant opened the final message from Earth. It contained only one sentence. We appreciate the partnership. We will no longer provide what is unwanted. For the first time since the Senate meeting, Vern felt something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not confidence. Doubt. Because suddenly he remembered Daniel Whitmore's final question. If Earth stopped providing its services tomorrow, would the Senate consider that a problem? And for the first time, the High Senator wondered if he had answered too quickly. The galaxy did not notice the first sign of change. It was not a dramatic announcement. It was not a warning broadcast across every system. It was a simple message appearing on a trade network dashboard used by thousands of companies. Human support services discontinued. At first, nobody cared. High Senator Vern Kale saw the report while reviewing another political victory. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. They are making noise, he said. Nothing more. His advisor looked uncertain. Senator, the reports are increasing. Vern looked up. Explain. The advisor placed several displays on the table. Human maintenance teams have left multiple stations. Shipping assistance programs are ending. Engineering contracts are being closed. Vern glanced at the information. Temporary pressure. They want attention. The advisor hesitated. Perhaps. But the companies affected are not asking Earth to return. That made Vern pause. Across the galaxy, the reaction was different from what the Senate expected. There was no panic. There were no angry speeches from human officials. Earth simply continued moving forward. Daniel Whitmore spent his morning reviewing reports inside the Earth Embassy. He looked older than he had a week ago. Not because he regretted his decision, but because he understood what came next. Sarah Collins entered the office carrying a tablet. The Senate is calling this a political stunt. Daniel continued reading. Of course they are. They think we will reverse the decision once people complain. Daniel placed the report down. Will they? Sarah shook her head. No. Then they will learn something important. She sat across from him. What? Daniel looked out the window at the distant stars. The difference between someone who helps you and someone who needs you. Sarah thought about that for a moment. You really believe they do not understand? Daniel gave a quiet sigh. They understand numbers. They understand power. They understand fleets and territory. He looked back at her. What they do not understand is dependence. Meanwhile, inside the Galactic Senate, the first serious questions began appearing. Representatives from smaller worlds requested emergency meetings. Several trade organizations asked why their systems were suddenly experiencing delays. A mining colony in the outer regions reported that their navigation network was functioning, but their optimization software had stopped receiving updates. A medical station discovered that its equipment could operate, but the advanced support systems created by human engineers were no longer available. Nobody was trapped. Nobody was attacked. The galaxy simply started realizing how many things had quietly depended on Earth. Varun refused to accept the reports. He called an emergency Senate session and demanded answers. This is an economic maneuver, he announced before the assembled representatives. Humanity is attempting to create unnecessary fear. A delegate from a distant colony interrupted. Senator, our question is simple. Did Earth violate any agreement? Varun paused. No. Did Earth damage any property? No. Did Earth threaten anyone? The room became quiet. Varun looked uncomfortable. No. The delegate leaned forward. Then why are we calling them dangerous? Nobody answered. For the first time, the laughter that filled the Senate hall days earlier was gone. Daniel watched the session from the Earth Embassy. Sarah stood beside him. They are starting to realize. Daniel nodded. They are starting to notice. Is that enough? She asked. Daniel looked at the Senate broadcast. No. Sarah looked surprised. No. Daniel closed the screen. Understanding is not the same as respect. At that moment, a new message arrived from High Senator Varun Kale. A formal request for a private meeting with Earth's ambassador. Sarah read it twice. He wants to talk. Daniel picked up his jacket. No. She looked confused. No. Daniel smiled slightly. He wants to negotiate. He walked toward the door. There is a difference. As the galaxy waited for the meeting, one question spread quietly through every major trade network. If Earth could remove its support without firing a single shot, what else had humanity been holding back? The private meeting between Earth and the Galactic Senate was supposed to be a negotiation. Instead, it became the moment High Senator Varun Kale realized he no longer controlled the conversation. The Senate chamber was quieter than usual when Daniel Whitmore entered. No laughter. No applause. No mocking comments. Just hundreds of alien representatives watching carefully. Varun stood from his seat. Ambassador Whitmore, I assume you understand why you were called here. Daniel placed his folder on the table. I assume you understand why I came. The senator narrowed his eyes. You have disrupted critical trade operations across multiple systems. Daniel remained calm. We discontinued services that were never guaranteed. A few delegates exchanged uneasy looks. Varun stepped closer. You are making a mistake. The galaxy does not function because of one species. Daniel looked around the chamber. I agree. That answer surprised everyone. Then why continue this? Varun asked. Daniel opened his folder. Because the galaxy should not depend on one species while pretending that species has no value. Before Varun could respond, the Senate alarms activated. Every display in the chamber changed at once. A priority alert appeared from the outer trade regions. The room immediately shifted from politics to confusion. What happened? One delegate asked. A communication officer rushed forward. Multiple cargo stations have lost synchronization with their navigation networks. Varun looked at Daniel. Did Earth do this? Daniel shook his head. No. Then explain it. Daniel looked toward the main display. We did not break anything. We simply stopped updating systems that belonged to us. The room went silent. Then another alert appeared. A major trade hub had entered emergency operation mode. Not because it was destroyed. Not because it was attacked. Because thousands of connected systems were suddenly trying to operate without the human support they had relied on for years. Vern's confidence began to disappear. "Restore the connection," he ordered. The communication officer looked nervous. "Senator, Earth controls the authorization." Vern turned toward Daniel. "You can fix this." Daniel looked at him calmly. "Yes." Everyone waited. "But I will not." The words shocked the chamber. "You are willing to let entire regions struggle just to prove a point?" Vern asked. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Not anger. Disappointment. "No, Senator. I am willing to stop pretending that respect can be replaced with convenience." Outside the Senate, the situation continued changing. Human transport ships were leaving several major trade centers, not as an attack, but as a planned withdrawal. Alien security fleets followed them, expecting resistance. Instead, they found empty routes and silent communication channels. No confrontation, no conflict, just a civilization stepping away. On one observation station, a young alien commander watched the final human vessel depart. "They are leaving without a fight?" his officer asked. The commander looked at the data screen. "That is what worries me." Back in the Senate chamber, Varun received one final report. The message was short. Human logistics networks had been removed from public access. Several ancient trade routes were now unstable. The galaxy was beginning to understand that Earth had not built an empire. Earth had built connections. Daniel picked up his folder and prepared to leave. Varun watched him carefully. "Ambassador." Daniel stopped. "What?" The senator struggled to find the right words. "What exactly are you trying to prove?" Daniel looked back at the chamber where everyone had once laughed at him. "Nothing." A pause. "I am trying to show you what you already proved yourselves." Varun frowned. "And what is that?" Daniel opened the door. "That you never respected what you needed most." Then he walked away, leaving the Senate with a problem no fleet could solve and no treaty could ignore. The galaxy finally stopped laughing, but it had not started listening yet. For High Senator Vern Kale, that was the most dangerous part. He sat alone inside the Senate chamber long after the other delegates had left. The empty seats around him felt different now. A few days earlier, those same seats had been filled with laughter when Earth's ambassador stood before them. Now they were filled with questions. Vern looked at the trade reports covering the main display. More delays, more requests, more systems asking why their operations depended so heavily on human support. He dismissed the reports with a frustrated motion. "This is temporary," he said to himself. "Every civilization adapts." But even he did not believe the words anymore. The door opened behind him. His advisor entered quietly. "Senator, the economic review is complete." Vern did not look away from the screen. "And?" The advisor hesitated. "The problem is larger than expected." Vern finally turned. "Explain." The advisor activated a holographic map of the galaxy. Thousands of trade routes appeared. For decades, humanity has not controlled these routes. They built them, maintained them, improved them. He highlighted several regions. Navigation systems, repair networks, logistics planning, emergency coordination. Human infrastructure became part of the foundation. Varen stared at the map, and nobody reported this. The advisor looked uncomfortable. Nobody considered it important enough to report. That sentence bothered him more than anything else, because it meant the galaxy had made the same mistake repeatedly. They had mistaken quiet usefulness for weakness. Meanwhile, inside the Earth Embassy, Daniel Whitmore watched the same reports. Sarah Collins stood beside him, reading the latest updates. "The Senate is starting to understand," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No, they are starting to calculate." Sarah looked at him. "Is there a difference?" Daniel closed the report. "A big one." He walked toward the window, overlooking the diplomatic district. People respect what they understand. Right now, they only understand what they are losing. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Do you think they will change?" Daniel smiled slightly. "That depends on whether they want a partner or a tool." Before Sarah could answer, a priority message arrived. The sender was not the Senate. It was a coalition of outer colony leaders. They requested a direct conversation with Earth. Sarah opened the message. "They are asking for support." Daniel nodded. "Of course they are. Will we help them?" Daniel looked at the list of worlds. Some had supported Earth during the Senate vote. Others had remained silent. He took a moment before answering. "Yes." Sarah looked surprised. Even now, Daniel nodded. This was never about punishing anyone. He pointed toward the message. "We are not removing our help because we want others to suffer. We removed our help because we needed them to understand its value." At that moment, another message arrived. This one came from High Senator Vern Kale. The wording was different from his previous communications. There was no arrogance, no demand, only a request for a private conversation. Sarah read it carefully. He wants another meeting. Daniel picked up his jacket. Good. Sarah looked at him. Are you going to accept? Daniel paused. Yes. Why? He looked back at the Senate building in the distance. Because the hardest part of diplomacy is not speaking when people disagree. A small silence followed. It is knowing what to say after they finally start listening. Hours later, Daniel returned to the Senate chamber. But this time, something had changed. The room was no longer filled with laughter. The representatives were watching him carefully. Varun stood at the center platform, looking less like a ruler and more like someone searching for answers. Ambassador Whitmore, the senator said, "We need to discuss the future." Daniel looked around the chamber. The same place where they had dismissed Earth now waited for Earth to speak. But before he could respond, a new emergency alert appeared across every display. A major alliance had attempted to replace human systems with their own technology. The result was immediate confusion across their network. Vern looked at the screen. Daniel saw the realization on his face. This was no longer a political disagreement. The galaxy was discovering that replacing humanity was much harder than ignoring it. The emergency alert changed the atmosphere of the Senate chamber in a way no speech ever could. For the first time, the representatives were not looking at Earth as a political problem. They were looking at Earth as a reality they had failed to understand. High Senator Vern Kale watched the information spread across the main display. The alliance that had attempted to replace human systems had not been attacked. Nothing had been damaged. Nothing had been taken. They had simply discovered that removing something essential was much harder than expected. How long until their network stabilizes? Vern asked. The technical officer looked uncertain. We do not know, Senator. Varun turned sharply. You do not know? The officer lowered his voice. Because we do not fully understand the systems we replaced. The words hit the chamber harder than any accusation. Daniel Whitmore stood quietly near the entrance, listening. He had seen this moment coming. Not because Earth planned it. Because Earth understood something the Senate refused to accept. You cannot replace what you never took the time to understand. Vern noticed him. Ambassador. Daniel stepped forward. Senator. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The same two people who had stood in that chamber days earlier. But everything had changed. Did you know this would happen? Vern asked. Daniel looked at the display. We knew there was a possibility. And you allowed it? Daniel's expression remained calm. No. We informed you. Vern looked frustrated. You expected us to believe a warning from a young civilization. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. The answer surprised him. Why? Daniel looked around the Senate chamber. Because warnings are not valuable when everyone already agrees with them. They are valuable when people do not want to hear them. The room became quiet. Sarah Collins watched from the human delegation area. She noticed something different in Varun. The arrogance was still there, but something else had appeared. Doubt. The senator looked at the reports again. What do you want, Ambassador? Daniel answered immediately. A partnership. Vern studied him. After everything that happened? Especially after everything that happened. Daniel opened his folder. Earth did not withdraw because we wanted control. We withdrew because we wanted honesty. Vern looked confused. Explain. Daniel placed several documents on the table. For decades, the galaxy praised cooperation while ignoring the people who made that cooperation possible. Human engineers repaired your stations. Human companies supported your trade routes. Human scientists improved your navigation systems. He paused. But when we asked for equal treatment, you laughed. Nobody in the chamber spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Vern stepped away from the platform. He looked toward the representatives around him. Leave us. The other senators exchanged surprised looks, but they followed his order. Soon, only Varun, Daniel, Sarah, and a few advisors remained. The High Senator lowered his voice. I believe humanity needed the Senate more than the Senate needed humanity. Daniel nodded. Many people believe that. I was wrong. Sarah looked surprised. She had expected resistance, not an admission. Varun continued. But there is something I do not understand. Daniel waited. If Earth had this influence all along, why did you never use it? Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he answered. Because power is not measured by what you can take away. A pause followed. It is measured by how long you can choose not to. For the first time, Varun understood the difference between restraint and weakness. But before the conversation could continue, a new message arrived. It was not from the Senate. It was from Earth Command. Admiral Marcus Reed appeared on the screen. His expression was serious. "Ambassador, we have a situation." Daniel turned toward the display. "What happened?" Marcus looked at the Senate representatives. "Several factions are refusing to accept the new reality. They are preparing their own response." Varun frowned. "Response against Earth?" Marcus nodded. "They believe humanity has become too powerful." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped understanding would come before fear. But he knew history well. Whenever a civilization discovered a power it did not understand, the first reaction was rarely acceptance. Varun looked at Daniel. "What will Earth do?" Daniel looked back at the senator. "The same thing we have always done." "And what is that?" Daniel picked up his folder. "We will give them one more chance to listen." And across the galaxy, the people who had ignored Earth's first warning prepared to make their second mistake. The galaxy had spent centuries believing that power announced itself loudly. Massive fleets, endless resources, ancient names carved into history. Nobody expected power to look like a human diplomat quietly closing a folder and asking for one more chance to listen. But now, as several factions prepared to challenge Earth's decision, Daniel Whitmore knew the most difficult part was beginning. Not proving humanity was strong. Proving humanity did not want to be feared. Inside the Earth Embassy, Admiral Marcus Reed stood beside the main tactical display. The room was quiet as information moved across the screen. "They are forming a coalition," Marcus said. Sarah Collins looked at the reports. "Against us?" Marcus nodded. "Several smaller governments believe Earth's actions changed the balance of power." Daniel remained seated, reading the details carefully. "They think we used economic influence as a weapon." Sarah looked at him. "Did we not?" Daniel looked up. "No." His answer was immediate. "A weapon is something you use to force people to obey. We removed our support because we refused to be taken for granted." Marcus crossed his arms. "They will not see the difference." Daniel knew he was right. Fear had a way of simplifying everything. To some civilizations, a human standing up for equal treatment looked like a human preparing to dominate. A message arrived from High Senator Varun Kale. He requested an emergency meeting with representatives from the opposing factions. Daniel accepted. Hours later, the Senate chamber was filled again. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. No laughter, no confidence, only uncertainty. A new figure stood among the delegates. Admiral Tarek Sol, commander of the Helion Alliance, stepped forward. "Humanity has disrupted the galaxy's balance." Daniel listened quietly. "Your species controls essential systems. Your withdrawal has affected countless worlds." Daniel nodded. "That is true." The direct answer surprised them. Tarek expected denial. "Then you admit it." Daniel looked at him. "I admit that we became important. I do not admit that we became powerful because we wanted control." The room remained silent. Tarek continued. "What happens when Earth decides it does not like someone?" Daniel looked around the chamber. "That is the question you should have asked before you laughed at us." The words landed harder than an accusation. Varun watched from his seat. He understood what Daniel was doing. He was not attacking. He was forcing them to remember. Then Tarek activated a holographic display. It showed a list of human-supported systems across the galaxy. These connections give Earth influence over billions of lives. Daniel looked at the display. "No. Those connections represent billions of lives that trusted us." Tarek shook his head. "You expect us to believe your intentions are peaceful." Daniel stepped closer to the display. "No. I expect you to judge our actions." He pointed toward the information. "Show me one world Earth conquered." Nobody answered. "Show me one civilization Earth forced into dependence." Silence filled the chamber. "Show me one planet where we stayed after being asked to leave." Still nothing. Daniel lowered his hand. "You keep looking at what we can do. You never looked at what we chose not to do." For the first time, even the opposing factions had no response. But then a new alert interrupted the meeting. A message appeared from the outer colonies. Several independent worlds had rejected the anti-Earth coalition. They had chosen to support humanity. Tarek looked confused. "Why would they support you?" Varun looked at the message for a long moment. Then he answered before Daniel could. "Because they remember." Everyone turned toward him. The High Senator continued. "They remember who arrived when their systems failed. They remember who repaired their stations without asking for control. They remember who helped before anyone was watching. Daniel looked at Varun. It was the first time the senator had defended Earth publicly. But then another message arrived. This one changed everything. A hidden faction within the coalition had released a statement. They did not want negotiations. They wanted Earth removed from the galactic system entirely. The chamber fell silent. Sarah looked at Daniel. They are still not listening. Daniel looked toward the message and remained calm. No. He closed the display. But now the galaxy gets to see the difference between those who fear power and those who understand it. And for the first time, humanity was no longer standing before the galaxy asking to be accepted. The galaxy was finally being forced to decide what kind of civilization it wanted to become. The statement from the anti-Earth faction spread across the galaxy within hours. They called humanity a threat. They claimed Earth had gained too much influence. They warned other civilizations that allowing human systems to remain connected would create an imbalance of power. But something unexpected happened. The galaxy did not immediately believe them. For the first time, people asked questions. Inside the Earth Embassy, Sarah Collins watched the reactions across thousands of worlds. They are not accepting the message, she said. Daniel Whitmore stood beside the window, looking at the distant lights of passing ships. Because fear is easier when nobody knows the truth. Sarah turned toward him. And now they know? Daniel nodded. Now they are looking. Across the galaxy, independent leaders began reviewing old records. They looked at the history of human involvement in their worlds. They found the same pattern again and again. Human engineers arrived after disasters. Human scientists shared discoveries without demanding ownership. Human transport crews opened routes that connected isolated colonies. Earth had gained influence, but not through control, through trust. High Senator Varun Kale spent hours reviewing those records alone. The same documents he had ignored before. The same reports his office had considered unimportant. His advisor entered quietly. Senator, the coalition leaders are requesting your support. Varun did not look away from the screen. For what? For a vote to restrict Earth's activities. Silence followed. Then Varun closed the report. No. His advisor looked surprised. Senator. Varun stood slowly. I spent years believing humanity was dangerous because it had influence. He looked toward the old records. I was wrong. The advisor waited. They are dangerous because they have influence and still choose restraint. That was the moment everything changed. The Senate expected Varun to defend tradition. Instead, he called an emergency session and requested that Earth be given the opportunity to speak. When Daniel entered the chamber, he noticed the difference immediately. The room was still filled with powerful beings, still filled with ancient civilizations. But the confidence was gone. The representatives were listening. Varun stood at the center platform. Ambassador Whitmore, I owe you an apology. The admission shocked the chamber. Daniel remained silent. Varun continued. We measured your civilization by the weapons you displayed, the territory you controlled, the armies you could command. He looked around the room. We never measured the things you built when nobody was watching. Daniel finally spoke. Respect does not come from apologies alone. Varun nodded. I know. Then he activated the main display. A new proposal appeared. Not a restriction against Earth. A new partnership agreement. Equal representation. Shared development. Independent cooperation. Sarah watched carefully. It was everything Earth had requested before the Senate laughed at Daniel. But Daniel did not immediately accept. Why now, he asked. Varun looked at him honestly. Because we finally understand the cost of treating a partner like a servant. The chamber became quiet. Then another message appeared. This one came from the hidden faction that had opposed Earth. They had released their final argument. Their claim was simple. Humanity was too powerful because it could walk away. Daniel read the message carefully. Sarah looked at him. They still think the problem is our strength. Daniel nodded. They still do not understand. Understand what? She asked. Daniel looked around the Senate chamber. That the greatest proof of power is having every reason to dominate and choosing not to. Then a final report arrived from Earth Command. Admiral Marcus Reed appeared on the display. Ambassador, the withdrawal protocol is complete. Daniel nodded. Good. Marcus continued. There is one more thing. The room waited. Every major trade network has requested that Earth return. Varun looked at Daniel. Will you? Daniel looked at the representatives who had once laughed at him. Then he looked at Sarah. Yes. Everyone was surprised. Why? Varun asked. Daniel answered calmly. Because the purpose was never to make the galaxy dependent on us. He paused. It was to make the galaxy understand why cooperation matters. For the first time, the Senate did not see Earth as a young civilization asking for a place among the stars. They saw a civilization that had already earned it. But as the new agreement prepared to be signed, Daniel received one final message from Earth. It contained a single warning. A new generation was watching, and humanity had one last choice to make. Show the galaxy its power, or show them its character. The day the Galactic Senate signed the new agreement, nobody celebrated louder than the people who once believed Earth had nothing to offer. Across hundreds of worlds, the news was simple. Humanity had been underestimated, not because they had the largest fleet, not because they controlled the most territory, but because they had something the galaxy had forgotten how to recognize: restraint. Daniel Whitmore stood in the Senate Hall one final time, looking at the same chamber where he had once been laughed at. The seats were filled again, but the feeling was different. No one was waiting for him to fail. They were waiting to hear what he would say. High Senator Vern Kale approached him before the ceremony began. Ambassador. Daniel turned. Senator. Vern looked around the chamber. A few weeks ago, I believe this room represented the center of the galaxy. Daniel smiled slightly. And now? Vern looked toward the representatives. Now I think it represents the responsibility of the galaxy. Daniel nodded. It was not a perfect apology. It was not a complete change of heart, but it was honest. And honesty was where every real partnership began. Sarah Collins joined them moments later. She looked at the agreement displayed above the Senate floor. I still cannot believe this happened. Daniel looked at her. What part? She smiled. That they finally listened. Daniel shook his head gently. No. They listened the moment they realized we were not trying to defeat them. Sarah looked confused. Then what changed? Daniel looked around the chamber. They realized we were never asking for power. The ceremony began. The new agreement created equal representation for human and alien civilizations. Trade routes reopened. Engineering teams returned. Scientific partnerships resumed. But this time, the relationship was different. Earth was no longer treated as a useful resource. Earth was treated as a partner. Months later, Daniel returned to Earth for the first time since the crisis began. He visited a small coastal town where he had grown up before humanity reached beyond its own solar system. Sarah walked beside him along the shoreline. After everything that happened, do you think the galaxy finally respects us? Daniel looked out at the ocean. He thought about the Senate, the laughter, the silence afterward, the moment when everyone finally understood. I think they respect what they understand. Sarah smiled. And what do they understand now? Daniel picked up a small piece of driftwood and looked at it for a moment. That power is not about making others afraid of losing you. He looked toward the horizon. It is about making others grateful that you stayed. Years passed, and the story of the human ambassador became part of galactic history. Young students across distant worlds studied the Senate incident. Some focused on the economic impact. Others studied the diplomatic strategy. But the most important lesson was always the same. A civilization does not become great because everyone knows its strength. It becomes great because everyone knows it has strength and still chooses responsibility. High Senator Vern Kale was once remembered as the leader who underestimated humanity. But later generations remembered something else. They remembered that he was also the first to admit he was wrong. And that mattered, because the future was never built by those who refused to change. It was built by those brave enough to learn. Daniel Whitmore never considered himself a hero. When people asked him how Earth gained respect across the galaxy, he always gave the same answer. We did not gain respect by showing them what we could take. He would pause, then smile. We gained respect by showing them what we could have taken and chose not to. And that was the moment the galaxy finally understood humanity, not as a young species searching for a place among the stars, but as a civilization that had already learned the hardest lesson of all. True power was never the ability to control others. True power was the wisdom to know when control was unnecessary.